For over a decade, I sacrificed everything to help my husband build his family's company. On our anniversary, he announced to his family, "She won't be needed anymore." What happened the next day left them all speechless. I had spent the past 11 years of my life building something I thought was unbreakable. A marriage, a home, and a future with a man I once believed was my greatest love. My sacrifices were not small. I had left behind a promising career, distanced myself from personal ambitions, and dedicated every waking moment to ensuring my husband's dreams flourished. His family's business, which once teetered on the brink of collapse, now stood as an empire I helped build with my own hands. And yet, on the night of our anniversary, in front of a room filled with smiling relatives and toasts of gratitude, my husband raised his glass and announced, "She won't be needed anymore." Before we dive into this powerful story of betrayal and revenge, I want to thank each of you for being part of this incredible journey. If you're finding these moments of empowerment and transformation inspiring, consider subscribing. It's completely free and helps us grow this amazing community. Now let's get into it. For a few seconds, the words didn't fully register. There was laughter, the clinking of glasses, and the faint sound of a waiter refilling someone's drink. My hands felt cold as I turned to him, my lips parting to ask what he meant. But before I could utter a single syllable, his mother let out a delighted chuckle, patting my shoulder as if I were a child who had finally outlived her usefulness. "We're so grateful for everything you've done, dear," she cooed, her voice dripping with false warmth. "Now that the company is fully stable, we can take it from here." The weight of her words hit me like a freight train. My husband, no, the man I had unknowingly been building a future for, only to be cast aside, nodded in agreement. "You've worked hard, babe. But this was always the plan. You helped us get here and now, well, it's time for you to step back. Step back. As if I had been an extra in my own life. As if the past decade of sweat, tears, and countless sleepless nights were nothing more than a temporary contract. I looked around the room expecting someone, anyone, to express shock or protest on my behalf. But all I saw were knowing glances, hidden smirks, and the unmistakable satisfaction of people who had played a long game and won. My stomach twisted, bile rising in my throat. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This had been planned all along. I clenched my fists under the table, forcing my breathing to stay even. I would not give them the satisfaction of breaking down, not here, not now. "Of course," I said, my voice steady but ice cold. "I understand completely." A triumphant gleam shone in my husband's eyes, my soon-to-be former husband, though he didn't know that yet. He thought I would bow out quietly, disappear like an old employee whose contract had expired. He thought I would leave with nothing. He had no idea what I was capable of. The realization that changed everything. That night, I lay awake in bed beside him, staring at the ceiling while he slept soundly, utterly oblivious to the storm brewing within me. I had spent over a decade believing in him, supporting him, and sacrificing for him. And in return, he had discarded me like an outdated business model. But I wasn't just a discarded wife. I was a woman who had spent years managing financial records, overseeing business deals, and ensuring that every decision his family made was a profitable one. I knew their secrets, their weaknesses, and, most importantly, their vulnerabilities. If they thought they could simply erase me from the empire I helped build, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. I slipped out of bed and walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline that gleamed with the success I had helped create. It was ironic, really. I had spent so many years making sure their legacy remained intact, never realizing that one day, that very legacy would be the weapon I wielded against them. As I stood there, an idea began to take shape, cold, calculated, and devastatingly effective. Revenge wasn't just an option. It was the only course of action. A house of cards ready to fall. Over the next few days I played my part well. I smiled through breakfast, kissed my husband on the cheek before he left for work, and nodded in silent agreement whenever he mentioned his plans for our future. Plans that no longer included me. But beneath the surface, I was gathering every piece of information I needed. The company accounts? I had access to them. The property deeds, the confidential contracts, the hidden liabilities they had worked so hard to conceal? All within my reach. They had made the mistake of underestimating me, assuming that my role had been nothing more than a silent supporter. What they had forgotten was that I was the architect of their success. And now I would be the architect of their downfall. As I sifted through documents late at night, I uncovered something that made my heart pound, not with fear but with the thrill of a discovery that would tip the scales in my favor. Financial discrepancies. My husband's family had been skimming money off the books, funneling funds into offshore accounts, and manipulating profits to avoid taxes. The very empire they had so proudly declared stable was in reality one legal audit away from crumbling. I could have stopped there. I could have taken that information, handed it over to the authorities, and watched as their empire collapsed. But that would have been too easy. I wanted them to suffer. I wanted them to experience the same betrayal I had felt. And so I didn't just plan to expose them. I planned to make them beg. The night before the storm. On the eve of my departure, I arranged a dinner, one final gathering before I stepped back, as they so politely put it. My husband was in high spirits, laughing with his relatives, completely unaware that by the next day, everything he held dear would be gone. I raised my glass, mirroring the very toast he had given me just days ago. To new beginnings, I said, my lips curling into a smile. He grinned, clueless. To new beginnings. I took a slow sip, already tasting the satisfaction of what was to come. Tomorrow they would wake up to a nightmare. Tomorrow they would learn that the woman they had so easily discarded wasn't just walking away. She was taking everything with her. Final thoughts before the storm hits. As I lay in bed that night, my husband's arm draped carelessly over me, I felt no sadness, no regret. Only the steady, burning resolve of a woman who had been pushed too far. They had written me off as an afterthought, a stepping stone on their path to success. By the time the sun rose, they would understand their mistake. And when the dust settled, I would be the only one still standing. I woke up before dawn, my husband's arms still draped over me, his breathing deep and undisturbed. For years, I had found comfort in the steady rhythm of his sleep, believing it was the sound of a man at peace, a man who loved me. Now it was nothing more than the sound of my own foolishness echoing back at me. I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing through the past decade, every sacrifice I had made, every dream I had buried beneath the weight of his ambitions. I had met him in college, back when he was just an eager young man with grand ideas but no direction. He had charm, I'd give him that. But charm alone couldn't turn ideas into reality. It took discipline, strategy, and an unrelenting drive. And that's where I came in. While he was the face of the operation, shaking hands and selling promises, I was the one who made sure those promises could be kept. I built his presentations, crafted his proposals, ran numbers late into the night, and held meetings he was too unprepared to handle. It wasn't just love that kept me by his side. It was belief. I believed in him more than he believed in himself. And when his parents finally handed over control of the struggling family business, I was the one who turned it around. The long hours, the stress, the constant pressure to prove we were worthy of their trust. It all became my burden to bear. I streamlined operations, cut unnecessary costs, and negotiated deals that pulled the company from the brink of financial disaster. I watched as his family went from dismissing me as nothing more than the supportive wife, to treating me as their secret weapon. But even then they never truly accepted me. I wasn't one of them. I didn't come from wealth or connections. I had built my intelligence and resilience through necessity, through hard work, through sleepless nights filled with calculations and strategies. And no matter how much I did for them, I would always be an outsider looking in. I didn't realize how deep that divide was until the night of our anniversary, when my husband stood in front of them all and made it clear I was no longer needed. I sat up in bed, staring at his sleeping form, wondering if he had ever loved me at all. Had I been a partner in his eyes or just a stepping stone? Had he ever seen me as his equal, or had he always known this day would come? The answers didn't matter anymore. The damage was done. I got out of bed carefully, moving through the dimly lit room with practiced ease. I had spent years in this house, knowing every creak in the floorboards, every soft spot in the carpet. I walked past the framed wedding photo on the nightstand, the one where we were both smiling, oblivious to the betrayal that awaited me years later. It was almost laughable now. I reached for my phone and scrolled through my emails. In the past few days I had gathered everything I needed: financial reports, legal documents, confidential contracts. Every late-night strategy session, every business decision I had ever made had been carefully stored away. My husband might have thought he was the mastermind, but the real foundation of his empire had always been me. And he had just given me every reason to take it apart. The things I gave up for him. Walking down the hallway, I paused by the door to what was supposed to be our home office. It was where I had spent countless hours building the company alongside him, crafting plans that he would later take credit for. I pushed open the door, stepping inside, the faint scent of ink and old paper filling the space. This room had seen every version of me. The hopeful dreamer, the exhausted wife, the determined strategist. Now it would bear witness to something else entirely. I sat at my desk, staring at the framed certificate that bore my name. Once upon a time, I had been on the path to becoming something great on my own. I had been accepted into a prestigious graduate program, had opportunities that could have shaped my career into something extraordinary. But when my husband told me he needed me more than the world did, I made the choice to stay. And for what? For a man who saw me as disposable? For a family who never respected me? I ran my fingers over the edges of the frame, my chest tightening with a mixture of rage and regret. My past self had been so willing to compromise, to believe that love was enough to justify setting aside her own ambitions. That woman was gone now. I reached for a notepad and began listing everything I had done for the company, every innovation, every strategic shift, every deal that had pushed us to the top. It was staggering to see it all laid out. My name might not have been on the official paperwork, but the evidence was there. I had built an empire and they had given me nothing in return. Not anymore. The first step toward taking it all back. I had always been meticulous, always thinking 3 steps ahead. That night, I went through every document I had access to, cross-referencing financial records, tracking inconsistencies. It didn't take long to uncover more of their secrets. Illegal transactions, hidden accounts, names that shouldn't have been on certain deals. They thought they had covered their tracks, but they had forgotten one crucial thing. No one knew the ins and outs of the company better than I did. They had underestimated the woman they had spent a decade dismissing. As the hours passed, my plan took shape. It wasn't just about exposing them. It was about making sure that when their empire fell, I would be the one standing at the top. By morning, I was ready. I walked back into the bedroom, slipping into bed beside my husband, who was still oblivious to the storm coming his way. He stirred slightly, mumbling something incoherent, and I simply smiled. For years, I had spent my nights making sure his dreams came true. Now I would make sure he lived through my worst nightmare. I closed my eyes, allowing myself one last moment of silence before the storm I was about to unleash. The countdown had begun. I woke up the next morning to the sound of my husband humming in the shower, completely oblivious to the battle lines that had been drawn overnight. His voice carried through the bathroom, cheerful, unbothered, as if he hadn't shattered my world just days ago. He truly believed he had won, that I would quietly step aside, accept my fate, and fade into the background like an old, forgotten investment. How wrong he was. I stared at the ceiling for a few moments, my mind racing through everything I had uncovered the night before. My husband and his family had built their entire success on a carefully crafted illusion, and now that illusion was about to come crashing down. I had spent years being their most valuable asset, their secret weapon, but now I was something else entirely. The greatest threat to everything they held dear. Slipping out of bed, I moved through the house, taking in every detail with fresh eyes. The framed photos on the walls, the expensive furniture, the little luxury items that had appeared over the years. All of it was a direct result of my sacrifices. My hands had built this life, and yet, I had been cast aside as if none of it had ever belonged to me. I wouldn't just walk away. I refused to. My husband stepped out of the bathroom, a towel wrapped around his waist, running his fingers through his damp hair. "Morning," he said, smiling at me like nothing had changed. Like I wasn't staring at the face of a man who had plotted against me in plain sight. "Morning," I replied smoothly, forcing a soft smile onto my lips. I had learned long ago that the most dangerous enemy was the one who knew how to stay unseen. My time for confrontation would come, but not yet. He leaned in and kissed my forehead absent-mindedly before heading to the closet. "Big day today," he said casually. "We're having an important board meeting. Might be home late." I raised an eyebrow. That was a lie. There was no board meeting scheduled for today. I would know. I had been the one setting those meetings for years. If he was lying about this, that meant he was meeting with someone he didn't want me to know about. Perhaps finalizing whatever plans he and his family had for my removal from the business. Good. Let him believe he had the upper hand. I watched him get dressed, carefully choosing his tie, adjusting his watch, making sure he looked every bit the powerful businessman. If only those board members knew that the man they trusted was nothing without the woman standing right in front of him. "Don't wait up," he said as he grabbed his keys. "I won't," I replied, and I meant it. The moment he was out the door, I sprang into action. I already had access to everything I needed: company records, financial transactions, confidential communications. But what I needed now was proof that could bring their empire down in a way that left no room for recovery. I sat at my desk, opening my laptop, and began pulling up files. The offshore accounts, the hidden transactions, the fraudulent deals. It was all there, buried under layers of careful deception. They had operated under the assumption that no one would ever look too closely, that no one would question the numbers. But they had never counted on me being their undoing. With a few keystrokes, I secured copies of everything, making sure to store them in places my husband would never think to check. I encrypted files, created backup plans, and ensured that no matter what happened next, I would always be one step ahead. By the time afternoon rolled around, I had what I needed. But I wasn't just going to expose them. I was going to make sure they knew exactly who was responsible for their downfall. The truth hiding in plain sight. My husband's family always prided themselves on their reputation. They loved the spotlight, the admiration, the respect they received in business circles. But in reality, their entire foundation was built on deception. They had embezzled money from smaller investors. They had used unethical tactics to push competitors out of business. And worst of all, they had ensured that any mistakes they made would be cleaned up by me, the woman they now considered unnecessary. I knew what I had to do. That evening, I dressed carefully, choosing an outfit that exuded quiet confidence. Not the subdued wife they had come to expect, but the woman I had been before I sacrificed everything for them. I took one last look at my reflection, and for the first time in years I recognized myself again. This was the version of me they had underestimated. I arrived at my husband's office just as the so-called board meeting was ending. Through the glass walls of the conference room, I saw him standing with his father, deep in conversation with a man I recognized immediately, an attorney. So this was it, the final step in cutting me out. I stepped into the room, the sound of my heels on the floor causing all three men to turn toward me. My husband's expression flickered with surprise before he quickly masked it. "Babe, what are you doing here?" he asked, feigning casualness. I smiled, stepping forward. "I thought I'd come see how the board meeting went." His father shot him a quick glance, sensing something was off. The attorney, however, remained composed, watching me carefully. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder, placing it on the table. "You might want to take a look at this," I said, my voice calm, measured. My husband hesitated before opening the folder, his eyes scanning the documents. And then I saw it. The precise moment he realized what he was looking at. The color drained from his face. His grip tightened on the pages, his throat bobbing as he swallowed hard. His father leaned in, reading over his shoulder. "What is this?" he demanded. I tilted my head slightly. "Oh, just a detailed breakdown of every illegal transaction your company has been involved in. Offshore accounts, manipulated profits, hidden liabilities. You know, the usual." My husband slammed the folder shut. "Where did you get this?" His voice was sharp, panicked. I smiled, crossing my arms. "You really thought I spent over a decade working beside you and wouldn't know how to access everything?" The attorney cleared his throat. "I believe we should discuss this privately." "Don't bother," I interrupted. "I've already made arrangements. Copies of this have been sent to the appropriate people. You have until the end of the week before this goes public. Consider it a courtesy." The silence in the room was deafening. My husband's father looked like he had been struck, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled to form words. My husband, on the other hand, was breathing hard, his hands clenched into fists. "You wouldn't," he said through gritted teeth. I met his gaze evenly. "I already have." Then, without another word, I turned on my heel and walked out of the room, leaving behind the world I had once built for a man who never deserved me. This was only the beginning. As I walked out of the room, I could hear the murmurs of disbelief behind me, but I didn't look back. The cold, calculated decision I had made the moment I stepped into that office was now set into motion. My husband and his family had made one fatal error. They had underestimated me. And now I was going to make sure they understood the consequences of their actions. It wasn't just about getting even. It was about ensuring that their empire, built on lies and deception, came crashing down in a way they could never recover from. But I knew I had to be careful. Revenge, when executed recklessly, could be just as destructive to the avenger as it was to the victim. I needed to plan meticulously, to weave a web that would ensnare them all without a single mistake. The first step was clear. I had to cover my tracks. I couldn't let anyone suspect that I was behind the sudden appearance of incriminating documents. As I made my way back to the house, I felt the weight of the information I had gathered, the offshore accounts, the falsified records, the manipulated contracts. It was a mountain of evidence, enough to bring them to their knees. But it wasn't enough to just expose them. I wanted them to feel the full force of their betrayal, to understand that every move they made in their pursuit of power had consequences. I had spent years playing the role of the supportive wife, always in the background, always quiet, always waiting for the moment when I would finally be acknowledged for the work I had put in. Now that time had come, but I wasn't looking for acknowledgement. I wanted something far more profound: justice. That night, I sat down with a notebook and began outlining my plan. I had to be methodical, precise. No room for error. The key was to strike when they least expected it, to ensure that every move I made left them questioning their every step. I knew they would be watching me, waiting for a misstep, for a sign that I was vulnerable. But I had been careful for too long to make a mistake now. I started with the finances. The company's assets were all tied up in complex transactions, some legal, others not so much. I had the knowledge to unravel it all, to expose the hidden accounts that no one knew existed. But I needed to do more than just reveal the truth. I needed to make them question everything they had worked for. I spent the next few days combing through the data I had collected, crafting a series of anonymous tips that would lead the authorities straight to their door. It wasn't enough to simply send an email. I needed the kind of undeniable proof that would leave them with no choice but to admit their wrongdoings. I contacted a few trusted sources, people who owed me favors, and had them leak the information in such a way that it would appear to come from an insider, someone within their own circle. It was perfect. The authorities would never suspect me. But as I worked, I began to realize something. Revenge, when it's executed with precision, can feel hollow. The more I uncovered, the more I realized how deeply they had betrayed me. They had used me to build their empire, to give them everything they needed to succeed. And for what? To throw me away as if I were nothing more than an afterthought? The anger that had once been a quiet, simmering rage began to burn hotter. I wasn't just planning their downfall anymore. I was savoring it. Every email I sent, every document I tampered with, every move I made was a step toward something far greater than simple revenge. It was a reckoning. But then, just as I thought I was nearing the finish line, something unexpected happened. I received a phone call from my husband. His voice was different, tense, nervous. "We need to talk," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. I froze. Had he figured it out? I hadn't made any mistakes, but it didn't matter. If he had caught wind of my plan, I needed to act fast. I had no intention of letting him control the narrative any longer. "About what?" I asked, feigning innocence. "About everything," he replied. "I know what you're doing. I know what you've been planning." My heart skipped a beat. Was he bluffing? Had he somehow discovered the trail I had so carefully laid out? I fought to keep my voice steady. "I'm not sure what you're talking about." "Don't play games with me," he snapped. "I know you've been going through the financial records. I know you've been tampering with the company's assets. It's over." I bit back a laugh, my mind racing. So he had caught on. But how? Had he noticed the subtle changes, the discrepancies that I had intentionally left behind? Or had someone tipped him off? "Do you really think you can get away with this?" he demanded. "You're not going to destroy everything we've built. It's not worth it." A cold smile spread across my face. This was it, the moment I had been waiting for. He thought I was afraid. He thought I was going to back down. "You're right," I said, my voice as calm as I could manage. "It's not worth it, for you. But for me, it's everything." I hung up the phone before he could respond, a sense of satisfaction flooding through me. The game had changed. I wasn't just trying to tear down their empire anymore. I was forcing them to confront the consequences of their actions. The next day I received an unexpected visitor. It was the attorney, the one who had been at the office meeting when I had dropped the bombshell on my husband. He was older, a man who had always carried himself with an air of authority, but now his demeanor was different. There was a nervousness about him, a hesitation in his steps. "Mrs. Carter," he began, his voice cautious. "I think we need to talk." "I'm listening," I replied, my tone steady. "I've been made aware of the documents you've been leaking," he said, not bothering to sugarcoat it. "The family is trying to contain the damage, but I'm here to warn you, there's still time to make this right." I raised an eyebrow. "Make it right?" He nodded, his eyes flickering nervously. "You can stop all of this. You can walk away and none of this will have to go public. The company can survive. Your reputation, your life, it can all go back to normal." I stared at him, considering his words. There was a part of me that wanted to take the offer, wanted to put all of this behind me and start fresh. But as I looked into his eyes, I knew there was no going back. "No," I said, my voice unwavering. "It's too late for that." The attorney's face fell. He understood then. This wasn't about money. This wasn't about power. It was about something much deeper, something he could never understand. I had already won. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on me. The attorney's words echoed in my mind and I couldn't help but smirk. It was clear now that my husband and his family had underestimated me. They thought they could brush me aside, assume I would go quietly into the night. But what they didn't realize was that every step they had taken to push me out of the business, to erase me from their world, had only fueled the fire of my revenge. The stakes were high and I was determined to make them feel the consequences of their actions in a way they would never forget. But it wasn't enough to simply expose their crimes. I wanted them to experience the full extent of the damage they had done, to feel the weight of their betrayal in every corner of their lives. I spent the next few days keeping my distance from everyone, playing the role of the wife who had been cast aside, who had accepted her fate. I watched as my husband went about his day, attending meetings, discussing the future of the company, completely oblivious to the storm I had unleashed. But it was all about to change. The final phase of my plan was set into motion. I had already secured the financial records, the fraudulent documents, the evidence that would bring their empire crashing down. But now I needed to make sure that when it all fell apart they would have no one to turn to. I needed to make sure that every business deal, every contract, every deal they had ever made was exposed, leaving them with nothing. I made sure to send the final anonymous tip to the authorities. This time, it was the critical evidence that would make everything irreversible. I knew the timing had to be perfect. I waited until the night before the scheduled board meeting, when the family would be gathered together to discuss new opportunities, to send the tip. The phone call came shortly after. It was from one of the agents I had contacted. They had already begun their investigation. It was a matter of time before the truth came to light. I could hear the sense of urgency in the agent's voice. He told me that the information I had provided was enough to launch an official inquiry. I allowed myself a small, triumphant smile. But there was no time for celebration. The game was far from over. I knew the next few hours would be critical. The family would be reeling from the exposure, scrambling to cover up their tracks, trying to salvage whatever they could. I needed to be there, to witness the moment when everything they had worked so hard to build came crashing down. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't about the power. It was about showing them that I was more than just the woman they had dismissed. I was the architect of their failure. I watched from a distance as the family gathered for their meeting the next morning, each one trying to hold on to their position, to maintain the facade of control. My husband stood at the head of the table, his face pale, his jaw clenched as he addressed the group. He tried to project confidence, but I could see the cracks starting to show. And then the bombshell dropped. The authorities arrived. The look on his face was priceless. He tried to play it off, tried to act like everything was fine, but it was clear that the walls were closing in on him. I could feel the tension in the room as the agents began to present their findings, laying out the evidence piece by piece. "Your company has been involved in a series of illegal financial transactions," one of the agents said, his voice steady and authoritative. "These transactions involve offshore accounts, falsified records, and deliberate manipulation of the market. We have gathered enough evidence to take legal action." I could see the color drain from my husband's face as the full weight of the situation hit him. His father, ever the stoic figure, seemed to shrink under the pressure. His mother, who had always stood beside him with unwavering loyalty, now looked lost, unsure of what to do. The room was silent, save for the agent's voice, which continued to outline the charges against them. For a moment I almost felt pity for them. Almost. But then the agent turned toward me. "Mrs. Carter," he said, his eyes locking with mine. "We've gathered a great deal of evidence, and it's thanks to your assistance that we were able to uncover the full extent of the fraud. Your cooperation has been invaluable." I smiled, the satisfaction rising within me like a wave. It was over. They had no escape now. But just as I thought the game was over, my husband did something unexpected. He stood up, his chair scraping against the floor as he pushed it back. "This is ridiculous," he spat. "You don't know what you're talking about. We've done nothing wrong." The agent didn't flinch. "We have all the evidence we need, Mr. Carter. The truth is out there and there's no hiding from it now." But it wasn't just the authorities that were closing in on him. I had one last surprise up my sleeve. I had sent a copy of the evidence to the press. I had leaked the story to a trusted journalist, someone who owed me a favor, and I had made sure it would hit the news the very same day the authorities arrived. The story broke like wildfire, spreading across the internet, television, and social media. The fallout was immediate. The family's reputation was destroyed, their company's stock plummeted, and the world was watching as they crumbled. I could hear the commotion as people scrambled to contain the damage. My husband's attempts to salvage what was left of his dignity were futile. The legal battles, the media frenzy, it was all too much for him to handle. And then the ultimate twist came. As the family tried to regroup, hoping for some miracle to undo the damage, my husband turned toward me, his face filled with rage. "You did this," he hissed. "You ruined everything." I met his gaze evenly. "No, you did this. You ruined everything the moment you decided I was disposable." He recoiled as if struck. The realization of how deeply he had betrayed me hit him with the force of a freight train. But there was no time for regret now. His empire was falling apart and there was no stopping it. The damage was done and I had made sure of it. The satisfaction I had hoped for was bittersweet. I had gotten my revenge, but it had cost me more than I had anticipated. I had torn down everything they held dear, but I had also lost a part of myself in the process. As the dust began to settle and the chaos unfolded around me, I realized that the victory I had won wasn't just about bringing them down. It was about reclaiming my own power. It was about taking control of my life again. I walked out of that room knowing that I had done what needed to be done. The family would never forget this day, and neither would I. I stepped outside the building, my heart pounding with adrenaline, yet there was a strange calmness that had settled over me. The chaos I had set in motion was unfolding behind me, the consequences cascading over my husband, his family, and their empire. The media frenzy, the authorities closing in, the company's stock crashing. It was all happening just as I had planned. But even as I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Was this truly the end, or had I just begun a new chapter in my life? The bitter sweetness of victory lingered in the air. There was no joy in watching their downfall, no satisfaction in their misery. It was as if a heavy curtain had fallen over everything that once mattered. I had spent so long crafting this perfect revenge, pouring my pain and anger into every calculated move, yet standing there alone in the aftermath, I felt empty. I hadn't expected this. I had expected closure, retribution that would heal the wounds they had inflicted on me. But instead all I felt was the weight of what I had lost. My marriage, my trust, the life I had built alongside him. It was all gone, replaced by the wreckage of a life I had fought to dismantle. And as I walked away from the ruins of their empire, I realized that the hardest part was not the destruction I had caused, but the quiet that followed it. The silence left behind by their shattered world felt deafening, as if all the noise of the past 10 years had been nothing more than a distraction from the truth I had been avoiding. I wasn't just angry at them, I was angry at myself for not seeing the truth sooner, for not recognizing that I had been trapped in a web of lies I had allowed to spin around me. But now, as the weight of the aftermath settled in, I found myself standing at the crossroads of something new. The decisions I had made, the path I had chosen, had created an opportunity for reinvention. It was as if, in burning their world to the ground, I had cleared the way for my own personal transformation. I didn't need their approval, their recognition, or their validation. I had spent too long living in the shadows, working behind the scenes, making them successful while erasing my own identity. But no more. As the days passed, I began to rebuild. Not just the remnants of my life, but a new foundation, one that was entirely mine. I sought legal counsel to ensure my financial independence, to protect what was rightfully mine. I knew that the battle wasn't over yet. There would be lawsuits, there would be legal repercussions, but I was ready. I was done being a passive observer in my own life. I would stand tall and face whatever came next. But the real turning point came when I received a letter in the mail. It was from my attorney, who had been helping me navigate the aftermath of everything I had set into motion. The letter was unexpected. An invitation to a meeting with someone who had once been an integral part of the family's business. Someone who had left years ago under mysterious circumstances. The name on the letterhead read, Sophia Harris. Sophia had been the company's CFO, a woman who had worked with my husband's family for over a decade before mysteriously disappearing. Her departure had always been a topic of conversation. Whispers about financial discrepancies, legal battles, and a sudden resignation. The letter was short, but the message was clear. She wanted to meet. And after everything that had happened, I knew I had to hear her out. I made the appointment. When I arrived at her office, I was greeted by a woman who appeared every bit the enigma she had been in the years prior. There was a sharpness in her gaze, a knowing look that made me uneasy. She wasted no time with pleasantries. "I know what you've done," she said, her voice steady, betraying no emotion. "And I've been watching, waiting for this moment. I've been waiting for you to take control." Her words hung in the air, but I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I focused on her, trying to gauge her intentions. I was the one who uncovered the first set of irregularities in the financial records years ago, she continued. I tried to expose it, but no one listened. I was forced out, silenced by threats, bribes, and legal battles. "But you," she paused, her lips curling into a small, almost imperceptible smile. "You've done what I couldn't. You've brought everything to the surface." Her words hit me harder than I expected. This wasn't just about me getting revenge. It wasn't just about me bringing my husband's family down. It was about something bigger. Something that had been brewing long before I ever set my plan in motion. "You're not alone in this," she said, her voice lowering. "There are others. People who were silenced, people who knew the truth but couldn't speak. I've spent years gathering evidence, waiting for the right moment to expose them all." A sense of realization washed over me. What I had thought was an isolated act of vengeance was part of something much larger. A web of deceit and corruption that stretched far beyond my husband's family. Sophia's quiet rebellion had been simmering for years, and now it seemed that I had unwittingly become a part of it. "I want to help you," she said, her tone softer now. "You've set the wheels in motion, but there's more to uncover. More people who need to be held accountable. More lives that need to be changed." In that moment, I realized that the revenge I had sought was only the beginning. I hadn't just taken down an empire. I had ignited a movement. Sophia's offer wasn't just about fixing the past. It was about reshaping the future. It was time to let go of the pain, to let go of the anger, and to focus on building something new. A future where I no longer hid in the shadows, where I could finally step into the light. And as I walked out of Sophia's office, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. The storm had passed, and now I could begin the work of rebuilding, not just my life but everything that had been taken from me. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but I was no longer afraid. I was ready.